what you need to do is put a plan in place, right? So bring your agency in or bring in your marketing team and talk about what's step one to get us to do this so that we don't freak everybody out, right? It's not the whole city you're going after or a whole state. It's this particular small group of people. And as long as you talk about these things, you'll higher mathematical probability to create a strong emotional connection with them. And when you do that, you get the cookie effect.
Welcome to the Bank Marketing Show, the podcast that engages and informs you for success in today's marketplace. It's the show that will make you a better marketer with trends, tactics, and inspiration from experts and industry leaders. If you're wanting to impact your personal success and position your bank as the best choice in your market, you're in the right place. Now let's dive into today's show with your hosts, Chris and Dan.
Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Bank Marketing Show. We're certainly glad to have you with us today. Excited about our episode and all that it's going to bring and add some value to you. We think this one's going to really make you think a good bit about processes and your marketing processes and where you're coming from. So we're glad to have you with us today. And Dan, great to see you as always.
Yeah, likewise.
Welcome. And I'll let you kind of bring Grant in for us here.
Yeah, so welcome, Grant, to the show. Excited to have you here, Grant. Grant Gooding is with us. He's the CEO of Proof Positioning out of Kansas City. So I'll let you talk a little bit more about it. But Proof is a market research agency that helps kind of get at the neuroscience behind marketing messaging. And we've had some interesting conversations in the past around how this can be applied to banks. So we're excited to get into it today. So let's start, Grant. Tell us, you have a pretty interesting background that you didn't start out thinking you'd be in market research. You didn't kind of earlier in your career you started in M&A. So tell us a little bit about that and kind of your career journey and how you ended up in market research role.
Yeah. Market research, it may be the only thing less sexy than bank marketing. So it certainly did not intend to be here. Yes, I was worked in mergers and acquisitions as an analyst in many capacities. The thing that I really, really loved is integration planning. So what does that mean? That means we have two organizations. We want to bring them together. How do we bring them together? And so it's kind of the non-hard, kind of the softer components of a transaction, right? We're looking at which departments do we keep and what people do we keep and why and who owns the customer relationships and what processes are significant. And one of the things, so we consumed, right? So I was a consumer of market research. I used it and was never really all that impressed with what we had to use in order to help inform us. Because what we really need to understand about two organizations, if you want to bring them together from our perspective, and if we're going to do integration planning correctly, is sure there's some elements of whatever, but what we really needed to know is why are people buying from you and why are people buying from you? Two entities. Why is someone buying from you and why is someone buying from you? And if those things are the same, right, those reasons, then the integration planning is much more logistical and easy. But if they're very different, we have to take those things into consideration, and it becomes substantially more complicated. So, if you have two entities that are similar but different, which is typically what happens, or typically similar in some type of synergistic way, you have one organization where their customers are there primarily because they have great customer experience. And then you have another that they have a great quality product. Well, you can't just integrate those two and expect the customer experience to be the same because they're just not. This actually happens a lot in banking. You have I don't know, I'm sure you've seen this. I've seen it many times where you have a large bank and a large bank comes in and buys a very popular, fast growing community style bank. And they completely destroy it at a speed that God would appreciate. And it's not because like oh, the customers hate the bank that was acquired. It's because they changed their customer experience in some way. And they were like, dude, you ruined the thing, which was the reason I was here. And so it's wildly significant. So by the way, how does that work out for the acquiring entity? So that big bank that came in, typically it's a huge balance sheet loss, right?
Yep.
Or there's a substantial amount of liability that was created through that failed acquisition, or just an acquisition that didn't meet the expectations of the reason they did the purchase in the first place. So I wanted to create a process or something that helped us understand, just help me understand why. If I can get ahead of why people are banking with this community bank and why people are banking with this other bank, I at least have a line of sight into how the customer experience needs to look. And it just didn't exist. So we started monkeying around with some research methodologies to help us figure it out. And so then we sort of accidentally created this company and this method, and here we are.
So you've done, I think your bio says you've done over 500 of these engagements, and you focus on kind of that emotional resonance, right? Like what's we talk a lot in banking about like how, I think if you ask 100 different banks, what makes you special? What do your customers appreciate about you? And they all say some variant of, we're trusted, we're local, our customer service stands out. Which all sounds super generic. So kind of tell us what emotional resonance means and what, how do we start getting from that default kind of trusted local answer to something that resonates with customers?
Yeah. So coming full circle on the method, when we were trying to figure out how to do research better, we started studying how the brain works and how decisions are made. And it turns out that we don't actually use our frontal lobe, neocortex, like our frontal lobe, prefrontal cortex. It doesn't really participate in decision making. We are truly emotional beings. And there's a famous neuroscientist that figured that out about 25 years ago. His name is Antonio Damasio. And he's like the most cited neuroscientist in history now, I think. But it's a very compelling thing that people need to keep in mind. If you aren't creating an emotive connection with someone, you're not doing a very good job of selling. So the first thing that banks do that really hurts them more than helps them is they talk about themselves. We wrote this white paper that nobody read, but then cleverly summarized it into a simple article that we called "Your Customers Don't Care About You," where we looked at 100 studies where what we called self-propagating language was used, where someone was things that banks say. Oh, we've been in business for 50 years or whatever. We're an ESOP, or we're family owned, and we've won these awards, and found that they were consistently in the bottom quartile of how emotionally resonant messages were. So you have people that are good in sales that'll tell you, don't talk about yourself, talk about the customer. So we sort of mathematically prove that to be true in a marketing context. So it really is critical that not only we connect with the emotive brain of a consumer, but that you do it in a way that doesn't really talk about yourself. Or if you do talk about yourself, it's certainly better translate in the consumer's head to something that gives them selfish value.
Right.
If you aren't communicating to that selfish brain, they're going to, because they simply just don't care. Do you care that a bank's been in existence for 50 years? Now, how emotionally resonant could a message like that mean? It means, oh, they're probably not going to lose all my money. But what's the real risk of that happening anyway? Right? So all these things are relative. Are people worried about banks losing their money? The FDIC exists right there. That's a little safety net that we have. So why would we talk about that? How's that going to move people? Before those government safety nets and things were in place, like maybe, but for the most part, even if people don't even know what the FDIC is or know that it will protect your deposits, how much does the average person on the street think that their bank is their money's just going to be gone one day? It's not something we're concerned about. So what else is that value proposition conveying? Hell, I don't know, but we've tested it and it doesn't resonate. So very simple free advice: don't talk about how long you've been in business. There's a very good chance you're actually increasing your chance of losing a sale by saying that than actually gaining one.
You know, Grant, I heard a long time ago, the reason that we all like our favorite aunt or grandmother, you know what the basic reason is because every time you would walk into the room with her as a kid, how are you doing? What's going on at your school? What's up with your, tell me about your friend. And it was all genuinely, it was all selfless and focused on me as the kid in the room, and that feels good. And what you're describing is carrying that forward into deposit account and loan seeking adults that, kind of want a little bit of the same thing. I mean, yes, I care that you're not going to crumble and go away tomorrow, and some of that you mentioned, and some of that substantiation. But so what is it about flipping that around for bank marketing to be about you and how it benefits you, not necessarily how great we are as the bank or how solid we are or whatever?
Well, I think it's tough in the banking business because it's maybe the most commoditized industry that exists, right? It's about as commoditized as you can be without being traded on a board downtown. So that's what makes it really hard. But it's certainly not impossible. It takes a little bit of a loosening of risk tolerance to be able to say things that no one else is willing to say. If you're in a highly commoditized environment, a very good rule of thumb is that you don't have to be any better than anyone else at anything. It's not important. You just have to be different. That's basically it. And by doing that, you will naturally create a center of gravity around a certain kind of customer. Okay? All you got to do is, be able to say it out loud confidently. So for example, if you're talking to a bank client and you say, hey, well, let's talk about who are your customers? Well, I can better understand your customer. I can better understand how to get more. And they'll generally tell you, oh, they're all over the board, right? There's high HHI, there's low HHI, there's, maybe they can tell you, we're not really interested in CD deposits, but we're really interested in growing HELOC accounts or something like that. Okay, well, that's still commoditized. So all of the subject matter, all of the specific areas of growth they're looking at are typically also commoditized. And then you've got online and disruptive type of financial institutions that can radically decrease your probability of making a strong argument in one of those areas. So what you got to do is you have to just kind of put a stick in the sand and say, we're here to work with X. And that's it. Now, X can be anything. X can be a type of business or individual. It could be perfect case study is who's the bank that only works with military? I should know this, but I don't. I have to keep tabs on lots of industries. I should.
Like USAA.
USAA. Mm-hmm. So what they have? I mean, I have seen some research come out, some macro research come out of field that says they have the strongest brand of any other financial institution, the highest NPS scores.
Yeah.
So
I'll tell you too. I have a USA credit card. My wife's grandfather was in the military, and we quite literally got grandfathered in. But we use this card, and I mean, I tell you, like probably half the time I use it at a store, somebody sees it and it's like, oh, were you in the service? Like it's got a powerful connection. Now, they've specialized in that, but they're not. It's they're much bigger than just that now. But it still has this great emotional connection.
Yeah, and the challenge is going to be to keep it. But that's it right there. All they did, they created an exclusionary brand, and they just said, hey, you can't do business with us. And I'll give a lot of credit to whoever their advertising or marketing team, whoever's managing those. They have that who's it, the tight end that played for the Patriots. Clearly, I'm not great with names. Sorry, Gronk. So they've got him on there. Who, boy, he's a gem of an actor, right? But all he says was, the whole premise is, even though you're a famous celebrity, you can't be a member. That's brilliant, right? Because you're creating artificial demand where it didn't exist before. That's how you do it. And you don't have to be that blatant. Although, I mean, most banks, we see lots of different financial institutions, and most of them are in a situation where it's like, what do you have to lose? Exactly. Right? It's a tough business. And a lot of them are upside down all the time, right? Depending on how diversified they are. So what do you have to lose to say, we only want to work with this? And instead, what they do is they lean heavily on things that are irrelevant, right? And I'm just speaking from the minds of the consumers. We measure this type of stuff, so it's not like my opinion. We're really involved in the community. Okay. How's that going to move the needle? Right? How are you going to connect with someone personally by saying that it's still about you, right? So the challenge that the financial institutions are going to have to face is they have to radically separate themselves from the status quo and put themselves out there and be willing to say, we're not going to be a generalist. We're either going to hyper-focus in a specific area, or we're going to hyper-focus on a certain person. And when you hyper-focus on a certain person, you can be very successful. It's just a matter of, it doesn't need to be a real thing. It could be totally made up. I mean, being in the military, it's a thing, but it's not real. There's no significance of someone or family member or their own military service in a correlation to banking.
Yeah, there's not like a particular aspect of a checking account that a military person needs. It's a checking account.
It's totally made up.
Yeah.
So that's all you got to do. I mean, likes airplanes, doesn't like airplanes. It sounds ridiculous, but if you say we are a bank that is only going to focus on people that like to fly in airplanes, that sounds ridiculous in a board meeting. But if you're a person, these people exist. And it's what a great we're going to change the name of the bank. We're going to call it Avionics Bank, right? And by the way, not a bad idea too, because they need to finance planes. Planes are a nice balance sheet, nice collateral, right? Sorry, rabbit hole, but it can be.
I was in a conversation yesterday around, hey, we want our bank to appeal to accountants and attorneys, and because they can refer their clients to us. It's like, well, then you need to at a minimum have the marketing materials that says we're the accountant's bank or something. Just get at the emotion. Why should an accountant care? You can't just say that, but why is that relationship going to be better for your customers?
Yeah, the thing that they can't get over is, so first of all, most bankers, anybody in finance or science, any type of scientific field, are typically a deductive reasoner. And it makes exclusionary concepts challenging for them, because why would we unnecessarily limit the scope of the type of organization that we would work with? That's stupid. So one rule of thumb is every time you say "and," you weaken yourself. You have to be very specific. We want to work with lawyers and accountants. We're like, oh, well, that makes me feel better because that's a much bigger group of people. But how are you supposed to now communicate to those two very different people? Oh, no, they're both in professional services. Okay, well, that doesn't mean they have anything in common other than the fact they might work on a similar type of deal and they give advice to people. Ooh, giving advice to people. See, now you created a connection. We only work with individuals that give advice to other people. Now you created an inclusionary way to talk about those two things without saying "and." Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So the way that we always think about it, and we're not in the job of branding, right? We just do research, but there's a guy named Al Reese that wrote a cool book. He's written several cool books, but I was introduced to it early on in my career by a brand strategist friend of mine. And it was called the 22 Immutable Laws of Branding, I think. Mm-hmm. And you read that?
Yeah, I've got it. It's great.
And I think one of the rules were your value is inversely proportionate to your scope. which is like the truth. And we describe it as like the hose on the side of your house. So your job, typically, if you're using your hose, let's just pretend your job is to make it as powerful as possible, like a power washer. Well, how do you do that? Well, the very simple way you can do that is to decrease the diameter of the hose, right? Well, when you go to the side of the house and you turn the water on, it stops at a certain point. But you can't go past that. That's like real life. You only have so much human capital and assets and time and everything else you can utilize. So that's what you got. So if you want to be more powerful, you have to decrease the scope of what you are, not increase it. And everybody always tries to do the inverse because they think that there's more opportunity, but in actuality, it's not. But when you say we're only going to target lawyers and not lawyers and accountants, your brain releases a neurotoxin because it sounds like a risk. It sounds risky, but in reality, it's not. It's the opposite.
Yeah, Grant, I was
all things to a few people.
Yeah, that's right. That's right, Dan. I was on a call with a CEO of one of our bank clients in Texas yesterday, and the conversation was so much about, well, what are you seeing with your other bank clients, and what are you seeing? So yeah, well, we've got a bank client over here in Georgia doing this, and we've got it, and so it was the ability to share best practices with him and all that other kind of stuff. And at the end of the conversation, he said, it's so cool that you guys just work with banks, because we've worked with all these marketing agencies over the years that, whatever, they're doing tire shops and bread stores and hospitals and happen to have a bank. And with you, we can discuss compliance and all these other guys because you know exactly what you're talking about. And that's not to toot the horn of my agency or Dan's, but that is the point. And you're so right, though, Grant, about with banks, that's really hard to do because Dan and I have said this often. They all sell money. Right. They all sell money. Wow. You have checking accounts and you have savings accounts and you do HELOCs and mortgages and small business loans. And well, so does every other bank. Right. So what are those differentiators and creating a personality? But I love the direction that you're taking it with proof that it's not just that. It's also about creating that some type of an emotionally based messaging and connection with your potential new customers. Is that it?
Well, one of our rules of thumb, speaking to that specific point, is the most important population you can learn from is the people that have already made the emotional decision to hire you, right? And that doesn't matter if they're buying a t-shirt online or if you've decided to keep all of your money with them. And it is very valuable to understand the homogenies that exist inside of those populations. Now, most of the time, what people do in analysis is they look at what we call coincidences, which is essentially demographics and psychographics. They'll go and banks will have this data, and they'll go, well, look, we 80% of our customers have this in common, and so therefore we need to go target those people. We're like, awesome. What are you going to say to them? Well, the answer is we don't really know. And that's because there is a coincidence that exists here. But unless you understand the premise of the coincidence, you don't know anything, right? You just know that, hey, I know there's fish in that pond over there, but like there's 150 lures to pick from and only so much time. Go ahead. And that's what's really challenging. We get to see like direct competitors a lot. And everyone seems to think the world is their oil. Every bank, for instance, the world is our oil. Let's just go get them. Well, there's some nuance about what you're doing that's making you successful. I worked on a deal years ago where there was an acquisition and our community bank was being purchased, and they had these sweet old retired ladies that were in all the bank branches, and they would make cookies. And they would give cookies away. And that was it. That was what they were known for. And it's sort of ridiculous to say, well, boy, we gotta make sure that we have fresh cookies all the time. Otherwise, we're not going to get people to invest, to like to borrow money or to put their money in here. But the reality is it doesn't need to be significant. It doesn't need to be some game-changing technology. You just need to give someone something to talk about.
Yeah.
And just like when you pull your USAA card out and someone goes, "Oh, did you serve?" And you got to say, "No, my grandfather did." You just created a whole bunch of completely free organic marketing for them that they didn't have to pay for. That's what I'm talking about. If it was my company, that's what I'm looking to do. Mm-hmm. So if I got people to talk about fresh baked cookies, as ridiculous and cheap as that is, and I got to do that instead of going and spending a whole bunch of money, I'm super stoked. Now I can focus all of my marketing money on building the size of the pie for my organization rather than trying to spend money to get people through a funnel. And it doesn't need to be any more complicated than that. First of all, the world is not your oyster. You need to understand what you do that's significant. What's funny is we look at banks from the outside all the time, and just like they all almost look completely identical. I mean, tell me the difference between First Bank and Second Bank, which are probably actual names, right?
Oh, yeah.
It's nothing. There is no difference. The building looks the same. The logo looks the same. They use the same 9 words when they're talking about themselves. There's no difference. When you go in and meet the leadership teams, they're very different. What they want to do is unique. The places they want to go focus are unique. And it's not like they're not trying. They want to go do it, but it's almost like impossible for them to unleash themselves from the status quo in order to do it. And so many times what we do is we say, really interesting, talk more about that thing that you really want to do. And then we concept test a bunch of things around that. And we can come back to them and say, this is going to work, right? Or it's not going to work, which does happen. Like, this is going to work, right? Like, you should do this. So what you need to do is put a plan in place, right? So bring your agency in or bring in your marketing team and talk about what's step 1 to get us to do this so that we don't freak everybody out, right? Because we're very conservative, obviously. And it's not the whole city you're going after or a whole state. It's this particular small group of people. And as long as you talk about these things, you'll higher mathematical probability to create a strong emotional connection with them. And when you do that, you get the cookie effect, right? Because human beings create natural gravitas to each other. You can't help it. If the 3 of us were dropped in a foreign country somewhere where we didn't know anything, you think the 3 of us would hang out? Mm-hmm. You think that a 4th person in a diner that spoke English, that we would hang out with that person? You can't help it. It's human instinct. And so there are these natural pockets of people that banks should be targeting, but because they don't know who they are and they don't know how they should be communicating, they don't know how to target them, and they don't know what to say to them. And so you have this weird conundrum where the default is, we'll just go target everyone. It's incredibly inefficient and a huge waste of time and money for everybody.
Yeah, I mean, I'm in countless conversations saying, like, you can serve everybody, but you can't target everybody from a marketing perspective, right? You don't need to turn away business. If you say we're the avionics bank, you don't need to turn away, train conductors, but you need to kind of stake your claim. But I think that's where, when we've met you and I met in the past and talked through kind of your research, I think it's so interesting, how you get from, hey, we think here's the areas where we specialize in, down to the messages that resonate. Can you talk a little about your research approach? And I think what's missing for a lot of banks is just that confidence to dive in. But I think that's where seeing data or kind of understanding the science behind it can help.
Yeah. So in most instances of banks that are trying to grow, or let's just say a pivot. Well, a pivot to a bank isn't exactly a pivot to how other industries might think of a pivot, right? A pivot is like a very small turn to one direction, right? But it can be very scary because you've never done it. Human beings absolutely hate the unknown. So most of the time what happens is you have these sometimes interesting conversations that happen internally, but what follows is inertia because you have no proof that this is going to work. That may or may not have been where you got our name. So what we do is we say, all right, we have to follow scientific method, unfortunately. So I can't I can't measure a population and tell someone, hey, this is what they want and this is what you should do. Because that's kind of not how it works for a couple of reasons. One, if I were to do that, I might take that data back. First of all, it would be scalable and anybody could do it, right? That means any bank could take that information, do whatever they wanted. And not all banks are in the same position. Not all banks have the same risk tolerance and preferences and all these other things of how they're going to operate, right? Our board will never go for that type of a thing. And so we say, okay, well, what are you thinking? Well, we want to do this and try this and try this. And be like, how are you going to do that that's different, right? And you kind of walk them down this pathway to come up with some ideas. So we have a process that kind of gets them there. And then we go into the market and we test the ideas. And then we also test like what they're currently saying, right? And we can come back and show them very, very accurately, hey, these are the messages that are going to generate the strongest emotional resonance relative to what you're currently saying. So sometimes we come back and say, none of these ideas really have more appeal than what you're currently saying. So they aren't great ideas. Or maybe your ideas are too early. Or there's an alternative in the market that is capturing those ideas and they're already executing on that. And so there's not an opportunity there. But sometimes there is. And then we get to say, hey, look, see this thing scores whatever. So here's how our system works. Our system works where someone comes into a survey. It's very exciting. But we use digital surveys because they're incredibly cheap, scalable, and everybody knows what they are. So if you're in one of mine, I'm measuring a bunch of stuff that other people can't or won't measure because they either don't know how or they don't have the technology. But what we're doing is we are mimicking how the brain works. For instance, if you go and look, when we started first studying how research works, most research methodologies that exist in quant specifically only exist to make things easy on the analyst, which is ridiculous because they're the least significant person in the entire equation. Like, who cares? So we just said, all right, well, how do people work? And so we created a series of methodologies that instead of asking a question this way, we ask it this way, or instead of using a measurement this way, we use this kind of a measurement. But they all follow how the brain works. I won't bore you with the details of all the neuroscience and the timing mechanisms and things that are all based into how the brain works and why the brain works. That's another podcast. But the reality is that we have a system that can associate a message with a number. Okay, and that message could be a specific type of message we're going to go use, or it could also be just an idea. And when you have a number associated with it, it's very dangerous. Now I can take that data and I can break it against all kinds of different populations. I can break it against experimental segments. I can break it against your prospects or existing customers. So I can very accurately tell someone, if you go and use this message, you have a high probability to upsell your existing customers. This is probably the number that you should be comfortable with, knowing this is the ceiling. This is the most you could probably get. And it kind of takes a lot of those question marks and that guesswork out of, should we do this, should we say this or not? And it just makes them comfortable. It gives them the confidence they need to pull the trigger or not pull the trigger.
Making that messaging decision based on data, not based on, what you're...
And we were just dumb enough to ask enough stupid questions to build a system that puts a number next to a message. That's all we did. And we're very fortunate that it worked.
So rather than just pulling an idea out of the hat that, hey, you should go after all owners of brown dogs. Well, okay, why? So, but you guys can go and test that. And
I can tell you if the brown dog concept's going to work. I can tell you who it's going to work with and how to target. But typically, we wouldn't do that. We would say, all right, bank, what do you want to do? Be like, well, we met the bank the other day and they have zero commercial business. And they're having a hard time getting their board comfortable with going into commercial because especially now, right? I mean, look at the commercial real estate market. So they, we're trying to help them think through, okay, well, what are the very unrisky types of commercial business that you think your board would approve to allow you to go create this pivot. And so now we're starting to have a productive conversation, and now they're telling us, well, we think it could be this, we think it could be this. And so now we can go and measure those segments and identify if there are opportunity inside of those segments. What's the competitive landscape look like inside of that segment? What's the, what are the alternatives that you're not seeing? What are the barriers that you're going to have to get past, right? Because there could be many. There could be the fact that, well, they think of you currently as this. And so the fact that you don't have any commercial business, that's a barrier. So we got to measure the probability of someone being able to go, well, even though you don't have commercial business currently, they're still going to be on board, and here's why. So this I have to communicate that, right? So then you have barriers. We think barriers are motivators. Sometimes barriers are so significant that we have to address them right off the bat in order for them to accept the motivating language, right? Because we are a very fear-based species, right? All of our decisions are made back here in the limbic system. So there's all kinds of nerdy stuff around those.
Well, so Grant, our bank execs that are listening to this conversation today and thinking, okay, how can I even start to have the conversations internally to get this started, get us moving in a direction rather than just, hey, we've been here 150 years and we sell money. How do we get moving in that? What's the first stepping stone internally in having these conversations to at least begin to move the thinking where there's a willingness there, to consider the kind of things that you're talking about?
We have two tools that we use in linear form. Both are very easy and anyone can do them. The first one is what we call burning questions. Every bank has a conversation around, well, we want to grow X. We want to grow deposit accounts. Too generic. What do you mean? Right? We want to grow a specific type of deposit account. Okay. So in order for you to do that, there is some kind of thing that is standing in your way. And most of the time that thing, it could be regulatory in the instance of a bank, but most of the time it's information that allows me to be comfortable. So imagine you have a crystal ball and it will answer any question you want. What questions are you going to ask it? All right. If we need to grow our CD deposit accounts, we need to know if younger generations even know what CDs are, because we got a lot of gray hairs that are using CDs, but we don't even think there's a lot of awareness around what is, with interest rates rising, not a bad idea, right? So we need to know if they even know what the heck a CD is, because that's a real risk. Because what if we just assume that everyone knows what a CD is, right? Which is a problem with banks too. Do you know why? A checking account's called a checking account? Because banks decided to call it a freaking checking account. It's completely irrelevant. You can call it whatever the hell you want, right? Like they actually allow you.
Don't even write checks anymore. So
yeah, I know. But the point is, you could call it whatever you want. I mean, I have a December account. It's a checking account, right? That's the function or like the category. But it's a December account. It's a money I put into every single month. And that month allows me to make sure that I can pay my taxes and everything I need to do, and everything, all the expenses that you have in December. Why can't you call something a December account? Well, because it's technically a checking account. Nobody cares. Nobody cares but the bank. What any of this crap is called. Anyway, I'm off base. What were we talking about?
Well, the first steps. We were talking about the first questions that these banks ask internally.
Yeah, burning questions. How do we get question number one? Do people under the age of 40 even know what a CD is? That's something we need to understand. All right. Point two. Do they have any capital that they might want to put into a CD? Good question. Burning question number three. If so, how much are they willing to let go of to put into an account like this? Okay. So that's a pretty good start. And that's just to get the CDs. What else do you want to know? Well, we're also trying to get whatever, right? So this is a very good exercise to take something from we need to grow deposit accounts to something that's quite a bit more tangible. And those questions are our currency. So that's what we're hired to do. So typically an agency will come to us and say, hey, we got this client, they're trying to grow CDs. There's a lot of question marks around it. We've done our own research, or just our own intuition tells us a good thing too, but they really need to see some research in order to be confident around this. And so we come back and we say, there's not that many people that know what a CD is. So there needs to be an awareness campaign that you put out in front of this, or it's not going to work. Or everybody knows what a CD is. It's fine. You guys are good. You can jump right in and start talking about getting return on investment, because the data says that's why they're going to do it. Or the folks that have the highest probability of putting the most money away need to hear X. So we give you all the message DNA that you need to be able to execute on whatever it is. So that's the first. Do burning questions. The second thing is an ideation process that we call it bell curve ideation. And imagine a bell curve. Okay, so you're not a nerd. This is going to be a tough one. So because I can't draw it on the board, but so most banks are wildly homogeneous, right? So it's going to be a really tall bell curve, regardless, depending on kind of what we're measuring, right? But let's just say let's just pick something like easy, like fees, okay? So we have this bell curve. Almost everybody has very similar fee structure. So let's think about what happens on the extremes. What happens way, way out here? And so we do this exercise where we say, all right, well, what's in the middle of the bell curve? Let's just say, just for the sake of simplicity, it's $100 a year. That's the industry standard. We pay $100 on whatever this account is, whatever, it's $100 a year. That's what everybody does. Okay, let's multiply it by 10. Let's say that we're charging $1,000 for that. Now we go through an exercise. What would we actually have to do to that's it. It has been brought down onto our bank that we now have to charge $1,000 for that account. How the hell are we going to do that and get away with it? Like, what kind of service are we going to have to provide in order for that to be a realistic thing? Like, what are we going to have to do? Are we have to bake cookies?
I was just thinking cookies, yes, and car washes.
I mean,
yeah.
And the point is like, there's going to be some ridiculous ideas, but in that process, somebody's going to say something and be like, that was a pretty good idea. We did this with a company that makes this, like, this was just a fun example, but they make this a part for these massive machines, right? So they're just like a wheel and like a cog in a wheel type of a thing, right? And we were talking about delivery times. So if a customer orders something, the time to do the specifics around the manufacturing and then ship it out took like 7 days. And I was going, okay, well, let's just pretend we could do it in 1 day. And of course, they're like, we can't even manufacture it in 1 day, let alone get it to them in 1 day. And a guy in the room says, well, actually, if we had a 3D printer in their location, we could send a data packet and it would be able to get it to them in 1 day. And that dude just like revolutionized their entire logistics process, because then they started going, wait a minute, how many SKUs could we actually do that with? And now they're smoking their competitors because they can get things to them almost instantly. And it seems weird. Hey, we're going to come into your facility and we're going to install a 3D printer. And all you got to do is let us know what you need. And that day you'll have the part sitting at that part of the printer. That's what I'm talking about. Ideas are not as crazy as we think they are.
Yeah.
Charging $1,000. Why is a Rolex more expensive than a Swatch watch? Because they decided it is, right? They're not decreasing their prices. They just make a lot more margin. So, ideas are not crazy. You can get away with charging $1,000 for a product that everyone else is charging a tenth for, as long as you provide the value appropriate to do it. And as long as we live in a capitalistic country, it's very possible.
And I think, I think for bank decision making, you probably get a lot farther if you, in some moments, can forget the compliance stuff, forget your reservations about why something won't work, and just ideate, like that. Think like, well, what if, right? What if these things change? How would we do business? And then you can layer that compliance stuff back on if you need to, but
always work your way back on the bell. All right, compliance won't let us do this. But the reality is if you think like $100, the idea that you're going to come up with, if you go, ooh, let's do something different and differentiate, you're going to go, well, let's charge 80, right? Or maybe we charge 110. And you don't come up with any good ideas. That's very incremental.
Yeah.
You do the opposite. Think crazy and then work your way back.
That's great. That's great. Man, Grant, we could pull on your knowledge and expertise in this area all day long. And I know that Dan and I are both sitting here going, okay, if I can get this bank client, I'm going down my whole client list going, okay, if I can get every one of these to do this, that'd be a game changer. So yeah, hopefully that'll be the case.
Well, you can steal the bell curve idea. I got it from a book called 0 to 1, loosely, but it was, have you ever heard of that book? It's the guy that started PayPal.
Yeah. I haven't read it, but I know what you're talking about.
It's fascinating because he said, my goal was to create the world's first digital currency, but I failed dramatically. And he said, oh, but I actually did create, the world's first online money exchange. And I thought, boy, that was really interesting. He stayed out here and it was a crazy idea, but he still got here, which was a dramatic, kid billionaire, right? It's a dramatic. And I'm like, well, how come any business can't do that?
Yeah.
But then, so we just put it on, but we use bell curves all the time because we're nerds. So we use bell curves as a way to do that. But anybody can do the exercise. It's not like, you guys can go do it.
Yeah. That's great.
Well, cool. This has been great. We'll let you go, but we've got a couple lightning round questions if you're up for it.
I don't know how well I'm going to do on these.
There's no right or wrong. Just Grant answers.
Oh, okay.
All right. Well, the first one, just share something really cool that's happened in your work, in your personal life.
Work or personal life?
Yeah. Just something you want to share.
Dude, I got 3 young kids, so most of my wins are around just like watching my kids, right? Like seeing the cool things they're doing, which means I'm not traveling to Italy or anything like that. It's more like Great Wolf Lodge type stuff. And but I don't know, big wins.
I think that I relate to that because it's like, yeah, I have 2 young kids too, and it's like the moments that you spend with them. Doesn't matter that you're not in Italy. The Great Wolf, the fun stuff can happen at Great Wolf too.
Yeah, big wins are kind of like when one of them wins a great soccer game or something.
Yeah,
I don't really think of that. Our big win company wise is hitting our 500 study. That was a lot. 500 studies is a lot.
Yeah, you got the process down at 500. Yeah,
yeah,
you're onto something.
But that's a big, and hit 10 years, I guess. It's a big win.
Yeah. Awesome. Favorite book or other kind of resource?
I really only read nonfiction. I'm convinced that there's enough interesting things that have happened in the actual world that reading something that was made up is not something I've gotten to yet. But I read mostly business books too, but there is one that I really, really like and I recommend to people. And and I connect with it a lot. So maybe it's selfish, but it's called Pitch Anything. And it's written by a guy named Oren Klaff. And Oren is a master pitchman. His job is to pitch big deals to investors. And he created this system that's pretty unique. But the first half of the book talks about a lot about basic neuroscience, how the brain works. And it's a really, really great book for salespeople and marketing people on understanding the basic physiology of the mind without getting really, really nerdy. Because he's not a scientist, right? I got to read that crap a lot, which is annoying. But he puts it in a very lay kind of terminology so anyone can understand it. So I recommend that book a lot.
I have to check that one out.
What's a really good, really impactful piece of advice you've gotten?
Boy, I get it all the time. One of the things I've learned doing this job is I'm an idiot. Like, I mean, imagine being, we go into a study and we have a certain, it's probably this. Well, we get to actually see that it's wrong all the time. And so it's a very humbling job. But grind and stay humble. Grind and stay humble is a very, very good piece of advice for a business owner.
Love it. Flipping that around, what's something you always tell your team?
We have several like sort of sayings. Many are functional as far as like how to look at data, things like that. But we have one sort of thing that we say a lot around the office when we measure people is this. And it's a very good piece of advice, and it's also extremely true. People are pretty damn different.
Yeah. All right. Well, the last one's easier, but people want to learn more about what you do. What's a good place they can go?
You can just Google my name. I have a very unusual name. So Grant Gooding. Google that, and that'll be enough. And I'm not this. There's a kid that is a swimmer, I'm told, that also has the same name. I'm not the swimmer, but apparently he's very good. So I'm the other one.
All right. Well, It's been amazing having you on here. I think I learn a lot every time we talk, and this is no different. So I appreciate your time and everything. Hope I know our listeners probably have a ton to go think about. So,
oh yeah.
Well, Jens, thanks for having me on, and have fun out there, and keep grinding.
There you go. We'll do it. Grant, thanks so much for your time. We really do appreciate it. A lot of valuable stuff today. Great to have you.
Appreciate you.
Thanks for joining us. To go deeper or get access to some of the valuable nuggets from today's show, go to bankmarketingshow.com. There you'll find episodes, links to resources, and much more. Be sure to subscribe wherever you find your podcasts. And join us next time.